The moment I saw Margaret Peaton standing in my driveway, that smug, self-satisfied smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know. She'd finally crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Behind her, a young couple wandered across my grandfather's lake cabin property, snapping cheerful photos as if they owned the place. A real estate agent was gesturing animatedly toward my private dock, boasting about the charming rustic features. And right there, staked into my front lawn beside the weathered garden gnomes my late wife had placed 20 years ago, stood a bright red sold sign. "Tom," Margaret said, her voice oozing artificial sweetness. "I'm so glad you could make it for the final walkthrough. The new owners are just thrilled about all the modernization potential." I took a slow sip from my coffee mug, the one that read, "Lake life means leave me alone," and let the silence stretch out until the air itself grew uncomfortable. The real estate agent shifted his weight nervously, sensing that something wasn't right. The young couple stopped smiling. "Finally," I said, in the calm, deliberate tone that had carried me through 35 years as a commercial pilot. "That's fascinating, Margaret. There's just one small problem. This property isn't for sale?" Her smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat before she composed herself. "Oh, Tom," she cooed, "there must be some misunderstanding." The HOA received official documentation that this property had been abandoned. We followed all proper channels through the Committee on Lakeside Optimization. I pulled out my phone, never breaking eye contact, and dialed my lawyer. "Robert, I'm going to need you at the cabin," I said. "Bring the fraud investigation paperwork we talked about. It looks like someone's been impersonating a property owner again." Margaret's face drained of color. I showed the baffled real estate agent my deed, my driver's license, and 15 years' worth of paid property tax receipts. Within minutes, the showing disintegrated. The young couple apologized over and over before hurrying off, and Margaret retreated to her golf cart, muttering something about protecting property values. But I knew better. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Margaret Peaton had been making my life miserable ever since she became the HOA president of Pine Ridge Shores 2 years ago. This stunt, trying to fake sell my home, was just her latest escalation in what had turned into an all-out war of attrition. It had started innocently enough. I'd inherited my grandfather's cabin on Silver Pine Lake when I was 35. A modest 2-bedroom place, but one steeped in family history, built in 1952 and loved ever since. For 15 years, it had been my sanctuary, a retreat from long-haul flights, jet lag, and endless schedules, a place where I could fish, read my old crime novels, and just breathe. Pine Ridge Shores had always been quiet. The HOA was barely noticeable. Old Bill Henderson had run it for 2 decades with a gentle hand, mostly making sure nobody painted their house neon pink or left their boats to rot on the lawn. Then Bill passed, and Margaret moved in. Everything changed. She was a retired etiquette instructor from the city, and she arrived with delusions of grandeur, determined to turn our laid-back lake community into something out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Within months, she unleashed a torrent of new regulations. Now we needed approval for kayak colors, permits for bird feeders, and written justifications for any landscaping that didn't meet her Lakeside Living Standards manual, a 70-page rule book she'd written herself. I managed to stay off her radar for a while, until the day she caught me fishing off my dock wearing what she called non-regulation leisure wear. She'd glided up in her spotless white boat, every hair perfectly in place despite the wind. "Mr. Greer," she said crisply, "I'm afraid I have to issue a warning. Torn clothing sends the wrong message about our community." I looked down at my old fishing vest, a single tear near the pocket from a hook mishap years ago, then back at her. "Margaret, I'm fishing on my own property on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm not hosting a diplomatic reception." Her lips thinned. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Greer, no exceptions. Also, your grass exceeds the 3-inch height limit, your hammock is at a non-approved angle, and is that canoe registered with the HOA Marine Craft Committee?" From that moment on, I became Margaret's special project. The citations started pouring in weekly, each one more absurd than the last. I got written up for unregistered pine cones that had fallen from my trees onto the communal path. She complained that the sun reflecting off my lake was excessively bright during board meetings at her house. She even tried to fine me for maintaining an anti-social distance because I refused to attend the mandatory potluck dinners. I ignored most of it, only paying the fines my lawyer said were even remotely legal. That seemed to infuriate her more than open rebellion ever could. Soon she was leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door, scheduling property inspections precisely when I'd be relaxing on my deck, and encouraging neighbors to report any violations they saw. Then things got creepy. One afternoon, while making lunch, I heard a strange buzzing near my window. A drone, complete with a camera, hovered outside, filming my living room. I knocked it out of the air with a broom and found her nephew, Bradley, fumbling to retrieve it from my azalea bushes. She said she needed documentation of interior violations, he stammered. Something about non-approved window treatments and furniture placement? I let him go with a warning, but filed a police report. Margaret denied everything, claiming Bradley had been conducting an aerial tree health survey. The last straw came in the form of an official-looking letter from the so-called Committee on Lakeside Optimization, a group that didn't exist until she invented it. The letter declared my property abandoned due to my failure to maintain adequate, full-time presence standards and non-participation in community activities. It claimed that any property unoccupied for more than 35 days a year could be reallocated for community benefit. It looked disturbingly real. Embossed seal, fake signatures, the whole 9 yards. For half a second, I almost believed it myself. But when I showed it to Robert, my lawyer, he laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. And that was before I realized just how deep Margaret's forgery went. "Tom, this is fraud. Plain and simple," Robert said flatly. "She's forged documents, impersonated an official entity, and tried to rob you of your legal property. We could have her arrested right now. I could have pushed for immediate charges, but I decided to wait to see just how far Margaret would take her charade. Turns out, I didn't have to wait long." 2 weeks later, while I was back in the city handling some medical appointments, Margaret had taken her insanity to the next level. She'd listed my cabin on 3 real estate websites, complete with interior photos she'd likely taken from that drone incident. The listings described my family's cabin as a distressed property, available for immediate renovation, and listed Margaret herself as the authorized community representative. She'd even scheduled open houses, telling prospective buyers that the current owner, meaning me, had abandoned the property and that all proceeds from the sale would go toward community improvement projects. And that, of course, led to the scene in my driveway, Margaret's fake sale unraveling right in front of her smug face. After the disastrous showing, I spent the next hour on the phone with Robert, the duped real estate agent, and Detective Morrison from the county sheriff's office. Morrison specialized in property fraud, and after reviewing the evidence I'd compiled, he sounded almost impressed. "Mr. Greer," he said, "this is one of the boldest cases of attempted property theft I've ever seen. This woman created a fictional committee, forged official documents, and tried to sell property she doesn't even own. We'll be pressing charges. Within 72 hours, Margaret Peaton was served with a cease and desist order, a restraining order keeping her 500 feet away from my property, and notice of an active criminal investigation for fraud, impersonation, and attempted grand theft. The real estate sites removed the listings immediately and issued public apologies. But the real surprise came from my neighbor, Janet Powell. She caught me outside one afternoon and leaned over the fence. "Heard the news?" she whispered. "Margaret's drowning in legal bills. Word is this isn't her first HOA fiasco. She's already facing multiple lawsuits from residents for harassment and overreach." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't say," Janet smirked. "Harold from the coffee shop says she might have to sell her house just to cover all those lawyer fees." And that's when it hit me. Margaret's home sat right at the only road entrance to our side of the lake. Everyone who lived along the water, myself included, had to drive past it daily. It wasn't just a prime piece of real estate. It was strategically perfect. So I made some calls, contacted my financial advisor, liquidated a few investments I'd been meaning to reorganize anyway, and set up a quiet LLC called Serenity Shores Holdings. A few weeks later, when Margaret's home quietly went on the market, listed by her attorney to cover her mounting legal debt, I was ready. The sale went through in 3 days. All cash. No contingencies. Margaret didn't even know. I was the buyer until closing day. I'll never forget her expression when she pulled up to collect her mail one last time and saw me standing on her front porch. "Hello, Margaret," I said cheerfully. "Thought I'd let you know. I'll be making a few changes to the property. Starting with the access road." Her face went from pink to crimson to a kind of royal purple. "You can't do this," she sputtered. "I need that road to reach my aunt's cabin. There are easement laws." "Funny you should bring up property laws," I interrupted, maintaining that calm pilot's tone I'd used through all our previous confrontations. Turns out the easement expired 5 years ago. Bill Henderson never renewed it. Everyone got along too well back then to bother. But times have changed. I think it's time to formalize things. I handed her a neatly prepared document courtesy of Robert. "I'm willing to grant you a new easement, of course. The fee is $5,000 a month payable in advance." Her jaw dropped. "Oh, and one more thing," I continued. "The easement includes a behavioral clause. Any harassment of other residents, false citations, or drone-related nonsense, and it's immediately revoked." Her carefully coiffed hair actually moved as she sputtered. $5,000? That's extortion." "No," I said mildly. "Extortion is when someone fabricates government paperwork to steal a man's home. This is just business. Fair market value for lake access. Look it up." She stormed off, red-faced and trembling, but I knew she'd be back. Her aunt's cabin was her last remaining tie to the community, and she needed that road. In the meantime, I got to work on my improvements. First came the no trespassing signs, spaced every 6 feet along the property line. Then I had several truckloads of gravel delivered to create a decorative berm across what had once been her driveway, which I planted with native wildflowers that attracted bees and butterflies. 2 things I knew Margaret hated. Next came the fence, a 10-foot-tall beauty of cedar and steel, stretching the full length of the border. Perfectly legal, sitting exactly 1 inch inside my property line, completely impenetrable. At the road's entrance, I installed a motorized gate that required an access code. Margaret, predictably, lost her mind. She called the county, claiming I was blocking emergency access. The fire department came out, assessed the situation, and politely informed her that alternate routes existed. Then she tried rallying the HOA against me, but it turned out most of them were quietly cheering me on. "Tom," said George Fitzgerald, "a neighbor once fined for owning the wrong shade of beige patio furniture. I think what you're doing is perfectly reasonable. Maybe Margaret finally gets to see what it's like to have her own rules turned on her." My favorite addition, though, was the meditation garden. I transformed her former driveway into a Japanese-style rock garden with a koi pond and several peaceful benches. Every morning I'd sit there with my coffee, reading aloud from my crime novels, just loud enough for Margaret to hear from her aunt's cabin across the road. She couldn't stand it. Eventually, she showed up at the gate, pressing the intercom with what she probably thought was a conciliatory smile, though it looked more like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Tom," she said, voice tight, "this has gone far enough. I'm willing to apologize for the misunderstanding about your cabin if you'll just be reasonable about the road access." "Misunderstanding?" I echoed, half laughing. "Margaret, you tried to sell my house. You created fake committees. You flew a drone into my living room. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a crime spree." "I was only trying to improve the community," she snapped. "Your property was dragging down values with your casual attitude toward maintenance. My grass was 4 inches tall," I said flatly. "You tried to make me homeless because of 1 extra inch," she exhaled sharply. "Fine, what do you want, Tom? An apology? Here it is." "I apologize. Now, can we talk about the road access like civilized people?" I pretended to think for a moment. "Well, there is one alternative to the $5,000 fee." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "You could write me a daily letter of apology. handwritten, at least 500 words, and have it delivered to my mailbox by 8 a.m. every morning for a year. Do that and I'll consider lowering the fee to $2,500. Her expression was priceless. The intercom went dead for so long that I thought she'd hung up. Then, in a voice trembling with rage, Margaret hissed, "I'll see you in court, Mr. Greer." I smiled and replied cheerfully, "Looking forward to it. Robert's been rather bored lately. He'll be thrilled to have something to do." And oh, was he ever. The court case was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Margaret strutted into the courtroom with a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He probably already knew they were walking straight into a storm they couldn't win. Margaret's big argument? She claimed prescriptive easement, that because she'd used the road for so long, she now had automatic rights to it. Robert countered with a mountain of evidence so thick that even the judge's eyes widened halfway through flipping the first folder. There it all was, proof of her deception laid bare. The fake Committee on Lakeside Optimization documents, the drone footage that Bradley had reluctantly admitted taking, screenshots of fraudulent real estate listings, and testimony from over a dozen Pine Ridge Shores residents describing her relentless harassment campaigns. "Your Honor," Robert said in that calm, lethal tone only seasoned lawyers have, "the plaintiff has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, fraud, and attempted theft against my client. She created fictional governmental bodies, forged official documents, and tried to deprive Mr. Greer of property valued at over $600,000. Now she seeks relief because the consequences of her own actions have finally caught up with her." The courtroom was silent, except for Margaret's shallow breathing. Her lawyer tried to pivot, insisting the HOA had legitimate authority to enforce community standards. But the judge wasn't buying it. He peered over his glasses at her and said with unmistakable disgust, "Mrs. Peaton, not only do I find no merit in your claim for easement rights, but I am deeply troubled by the overwhelming evidence of criminal behavior presented here. You're fortunate the district attorney hasn't filed charges yet." He turned to me then. "Mr. Greer, while I understand your frustration, completely blocking access could raise legal concerns. Therefore, I'm ordering you to allow emergency access only, as required by state law. For regular access, you're within your rights to charge a reasonable fee or deny entry altogether." Then came the part that nearly made me laugh out loud. "Furthermore, Mrs. Peaton," the judge continued, "I'm issuing a judgment against you for Mr. Greer's legal fees, totaling $78,000. I'm also referring this case to the State Real Estate Commission for investigation into your fraudulent listings, and I recommend to the Pine Ridge Shores HOA that you be immediately removed from any position of authority." The sound that came out of Margaret was somewhere between a gasp and a shriek, like a cat being stepped on. $78,000? Your Honor, that's impossible. I don't have that kind of money. Then I suggest, the judge replied dryly, you make arrangements with Mr. Greer. Perhaps he'll accept a payment plan, though, given your history, I wouldn't blame him if he didn't. He wasn't finished. And I'm also ordering you to attend a weekend seminar on boundaries, both emotional and physical, at your own expense. The court will provide a list of approved programs. You'll present proof of completion within 90 days, or face contempt charges. That was the final blow. Margaret's perfectly composed mask shattered completely. Her face flushed an alarming shade of purple, and in a moment that seemed almost too absurd to be real, she actually stomped her foot like a child denied a toy. "This is persecution," she shouted. "I was trying to improve the community. That man is a menace to property values." The judge's gavel cracked against the bench. "That's enough, Mrs. Peaton. One more outburst, and I'll add contempt of court to your list of problems." Court is adjourned, and just like that, it was over. As we stepped out into the hallway, Margaret made one final desperate attempt. "Tom, please," she said, her voice wobbling. $78,000 plus my legal bills, it'll bankrupt me. Can't we work something out?" I stopped and looked at her. The same woman who'd tried to ruin my peace over grass height and hammock placement now stood before me begging for mercy. "You know what, Margaret?" I said slowly. "I'll make you a deal. Pay me $50,000 in cash and write those daily apology letters for 6 months instead of a year. Take it or leave it." She took it, of course. She didn't have a choice, And those letters, oh, they were masterpieces of reluctant humility. Each one is just apologetic enough to meet the court's requirement, but dripping with barely contained fury. My favorite was the one where she spent 490 words discussing the history of lawn maintenance before, tacking on a 10-word apology at the end. The emergency HOA meeting to remove her was held the next week. I didn't bother attending, but Janet later gave me a full play-by-play. Apparently, Margaret tried to filibuster her own removal by reading the entire Lakeside Living Standards manual she'd written. But it didn't work. The board voted her out 27-1, with Margaret herself casting the only dissenting vote. According to Janet, when the results were read aloud, Margaret stood, pointed at each board member in turn, and declared, "You'll regret this when property values plummet and this community turns into a lawless wasteland of non-conforming mailboxes and unapproved hedge heights." Then she tried to storm out dramatically and tripped over her own feet. The very people she'd been threatening had to help her up. Janet said it was the perfect ending to the tyrant's reign. A week later, I converted Margaret's former home into a vacation rental, Serenity Shores Retreat. The tagline: "Escape HOA drama and experience true lakeside peace." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her pristine living room became my reading library, filled with all the mystery novels she once claimed were too loud when I read them on my deck. Last I heard, she'd moved 2 towns over to a gated community called Pristine Meadows. Within 6 months, she'd somehow gotten herself elected vice president of their HOA. A friend who lives there says she's currently campaigning to ban wind chimes, claiming they disturb the natural soundscape, and trying to pass a rule requiring all dogs to be trained not to smile because it creates an inappropriately casual atmosphere. As for me, I still split my time between the city and the lake. Though now I have 2 properties to enjoy, the guest house has become a small museum, each of Margaret's ridiculous citations framed on the wall for the amusement of renters. My meditation garden is now a favorite hangout for other residents who stop by to swap their own HOA horror stories. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'll sit on Margaret's former balcony with my fishing rod in hand, wearing my most disreputable cargo shorts and that same torn fishing vest she once called an eyesore. The grass on both properties stands exactly 4.5 inches tall, measured daily with a ruler I had bronzed and mounted on the wall as a trophy, because in the end, life is good when you know how to handle a Karen who's gone too far. The secret: patience, documentation, and the reminder that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's buying your enemy's house and turning it into everything they hated. The $78,000 fine and her removal from the board happened just last month. And by pure coincidence, I saw her one last time at the grocery store. She spotted me, turned sharply, and walked straight into a display of canned peaches. They rolled everywhere. As I bent down to help the staff pick them up, I heard her muttering something about inappropriate produce stacking heights as she fled the scene. I just smiled, because in Pine Ridge Shores, peace had finally returned.